Everyone finally awake? The Spanish Grand Prix is now over, and we're here to talk about it. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're here to talk about the 2024 Spanish Grand Prix. What went on, what happened, our reactions, and the like. We're going to take a look at our quick hits, our weekend winners and losers, and then, of course, we're going to check in on our predictions challenge here on this channel in the Discord and see who did good, who did bad, and who is now leading the championship amongst our little community. If you are interested in getting involved in our little points championship when it comes to predictions, head to the link down below in the description, join the Discord, and leading up to every Grand Prix weekend, I'll make a call for predictions, and you're able to have your voice heard and join in on our little challenge. But for now, let's go ahead. Let's get this thing started with our weekend quick hits. Let's get this thing started with our quick hits of the Grand Prix that we saw today. And we're going to start with Mercedes because one of the points I brought up in the last Grand Prix recap at Canada, which is we saw Mercedes perform particularly strong around Canada. And the biggest question that we had leaving that weekend was, can Mercedes do it again? Because we've seen Mercedes do this where they'll be strong one weekend and then fall back off a cliff. This is now 2 Grand Prix weekends in a row where we've seen very strong results from both drivers. We saw Lewis Hamilton finally get on the podium in 2024, marking, I believe, his 18th consecutive season of standing on the podium, which is an absolutely wild stat in itself. But nonetheless, we did see both, obviously Lewis on the podium and George not far behind. Very, positive results, safe to say. Now, I do think they still have a long way to go in terms of their development this season, but at the same time, we have seen everyone else take a step up. It was nice to see Mercedes finally, prove to us that their step forward was maybe legit. We're going to find out more as they head to Austria next weekend, but at the same time, I got to put my hands up. I wasn't really a believer. Maybe it's another flash in the pan. Merc does run very well around Spain, but at the same time, got to give him props for coming back-to-back weekends and getting Lewis on the podium once again. Taking a look at the final result here, another Max win. We snooze. I do think that the gap from Red Bull to the rest of the field is definitely a lot lower, or a lot narrower than we have seen maybe in the beginning of the season. But at the same time, Max Verstappen is the difference here. And while everyone else is too busy fighting each other, Max just drives off into the distance and wins another race. We snooze on that one. We got to talk about Lando letting another win opportunity really slip up. I'm going to touch on this more in a bit, but this is definitely going to be one that Lando, in just his second pole, is going to look back on and probably have some regrets. I think we saw it pretty early on, immediately in post-race rather, that I think he knew that this was another one that got away, and I think that says a lot about where he's at, potentially with his expectations, but at the same time, we'll get into it, I promise. Let's talk about Ferrari a little bit. Ferrari seems a little bit lost in space, to put it in a certain phrase or not. This is back-to-back weekends where Ferrari was all over the place. Obviously in Canada, mixed conditions, odd engine settings for Charles, and Carlos obviously doing what he did. Expecting to come back in Spain and really perform well, kind of found themselves third or fourth fastest in this one. Charles and Carlos obviously had their moment early on in the race, and they kind of just found themselves running around behind Max, behind Lando, and behind both Mercs. Ferrari kind of finding themselves a little bit lost. It really felt like we saw them take a leap around the Monaco round of this season, but at the same time, since then, it's really been nowhere's land for them, and we really need to see what kind of direction they're going forward in, because they are kind of just treading water right now. I don't know if they are still struggling to get on top of the car, or maybe it's just, like Mercedes doing well, maybe it's just back-to-back weekends of Ferrari just kind of not knowing what's going on. I don't know. We're going to find out very quickly with this triple header that we're on as they head to Austria next. Ferrari usually does very well around Austria, and so if they struggle around Austria, I think it's time to start putting up the red flags and start to worry about the Scarlet team. It looks like Alpine is finally pulling a McLaren from last season, where they start off really bad in the season and they start to finally come around, potentially. We did see both cars finish in the points. They left Haas, as much as it pains me to say, in the constructors. I believe they're now on 8 points. They've scored good points in the last few rounds, while some of those other teams have not. And I think it's finally an opportunity for Alpine to finally, I think, get into a groove, potentially. Obviously, finishing 9th and 10th isn't probably where they want to be finishing, but at the same time, getting both cars in the points, considering where they started this year, has gotten to feel good. And going into this triple header, starting it off with a double points finish for your team, team, probably a good way to start building some momentum. So it'll be interesting to see what Alpine does going forward, but gotta give them their props because, hey, they nailed it. What can I say? Kind of in the opposite way of Alpine moving up, we have to talk about Aston Martin kind of sliding backwards. No points for Aston Martin this weekend. Very shocking, if I do say so myself. I think Fernando probably really wanted to do well. Obviously, it is home race, and really they just looked off the pace all year, and I think we've seen a lot from them this year that really just shows that I don't know if they're really on top of this current philosophy of their car. Their upgrades don't seem to be working, and it really just looks like they're really struggling all around, and it's really kind of pains me to see because it doesn't feel so long ago that it was the beginning of last season where we saw Fernando finishing P2 on the podium like every weekend in the first handful of rounds. So hopefully they get their stuff figured out. I would love to see more battling going on, but when you're now battling Nico Hülkenberg for just outside the points, it's not where you want to be, Aston, I promise. Speaking of Haas, I think a bit of a mixed results kind of race in this one. A couple of penalties really set our drivers back in this one. Obviously, Kevin, I don't think was ever really truly challenging for points in this one. But a 5-second penalty for Hulk, who ended up finishing in P11, definitely hurts a little bit. It definitely wouldn't have kept him. It didn't keep him from, scoring points or anything, but I do think it is a bit of a, I don't know, kind of just a sour taste in your mouth when both drivers get penalties. And, at the end of the day, I think a positive to take away from this one is that Hülkenberg did look very racy down the stretch in this one. So it looks like, the tire wear issue is definitely a lot more in reins and in check. But at the same time, I think there's still a long way to go in terms of one lap pace and translating, this solid race pace into, good qualifying pace to then turn into solid points. So I do think, they also usually run very well around Austria. Hopefully they're able to come back and have a strong weekend next time out to really, gain some momentum back. But at the same time, Haas definitely a team that is kind of treading water at the moment and could fall off the cliff if it doesn't go well. So hopefully, for my sake and my mental health and sanity, they do, because I would love to see them kind of get back into the Alpine situation where we're fighting for the last couple of points paying positions, because that would be amazing. And then we got to obviously talk about Williams and VCarb in this one. Stake, I think we're going to leave out kind of to pasture a little bit, because I think they did have a pretty strong weekend all in all, but at the same time, they're still kind of nowhere to be seen when it comes to results or anything like that. Williams and VCarb, I do think definitely had very disappointing weekends, all things considered. I do think that Williams was definitely expecting to be obviously not qualifying 19th and 20th, kind of on pace, and then finishing at the bottom again in the Grand Prix itself. And so I don't know what's going on over there, but I think they're also probably struggling to kind of get to grips with what they're looking at with their car and trying to find a development path for themselves. I know they brought upgrades recently, but it does not seem to be working to the way they would like them to. So, man, what a tough weekend for them and VCarb as well. Yuki obviously just not on the pace this weekend, and Daniel as well. They both finished in the bottom 5, I believe. Daniel did beat Yuki, so I guess that's a good nod for Daniel. Yuki's kind of been slumping the last couple of weekends. I'd love to see him get back on his groove, because he was super fun to watch at the beginning of the season, and I'm not looking forward to a universe where Yuki kind of falls back into the deep mid-pack and is just nowhere to be found. So I don't know, but what do you guys think? Let me know down in the comment section below what you saw this week that I didn't mention here. All right, let's move on quickly to talk about our weekend winners and losers. And we have a team winner and a individual loser. We're starting things off with our weekend winner, and I am going for Mercedes. I kind of mentioned it in our quick hit section that I do think they definitely followed up their strong weekend in Canada with a very strong weekend here in Spain. But it looks like they've taken another step towards challenging towards that upper limit. I don't think they're quite challenging for second fastest. I think McLaren pretty much clears that. And even then, there's an argument to be made that it might even be McLaren, Red Bull fighting for one. It definitely looks like Mercedes is taking a step over Ferrari right now. I kind of mentioned how it's interesting to see where Ferrari ends up after this. I definitely don't know if they're truly challenging for a win recently. I do think Canada was a good opportunity for a win that just didn't pan out. I don't know if they're going to have the pace overall, weekend to weekend to really challenge for wins, but at minimum, fighting at the front, gotta feel better than fighting for P7. So I'm sure they're pretty happy. And so that's why this weekend I've gone for Mercedes as my weekend winner. I've got a bit controversial for my weekend loser. Like I mentioned, it is an individual contributor, and I have gone for Lando Norris as my biggest loser this weekend. And I'm going to just say it very bluntly that Lando should have won today in Spain. it's a fact. He had the faster car. Everyone knew it. Even he knew it after the fact. And he just couldn't, convert his second ever pole into a win in a car and a track in a situation where I think that he really should have. He made mistakes in the opening laps that allowed him to kind of fall back into the clutches of, that upper top end of the field, with the Mercedes of the world. And obviously we saw the start George Russell had when Lando got a little too tunnel vision on Max Verstappen, actually pushing Max onto the grass, allowing George to get a great run all the way down into the first corner, which really just set him back away from the front. And it went from being a race where he had to react to other drivers instead of dictating what other drivers had to do in order to react to him. If, I'm not going to say that if, Lando had led into turn one that he would have won the race, but I definitely think that if he had led into turn one, I think his winning percentage goes from the 60% we had with 15 laps to go to a lot higher than that. All right, let's come down here and talk about our predictions results, going over the predictions that I made before the weekend began. Starting off with my pick for biggest positive surprise, I chose Yuki Tsunoda. I thought Yuki was going to be a bounce back, of the universe of the season here. But unfortunately, RB did not look on the pace at all. In fact, we're not on the pace at all. And so Yuki just floundered around at the bottom of the grid, and it really just never came home. So no points for me there. Really hoping we can see a bounce back from Yuki, next weekend in Austria. My pick for biggest disappointment, I went for Esteban Ocon. I don't think it's anybody's surprise based on his salty reaction at the end of Canadian Grand Prix that they wouldn't have been surprised to see something happen with Esteban here in Spain. But the professionalism won out in this one, and they bring home a double points finish. So absolutely no points for me on that one. And we're starting off super hot, 0 for 2 on the weekend so far. It gets a little bit better when we move on to my qualifying top three. I predicted a Max Verstappen pole, a Carlos Sainz P2, and a Lando Norris P3. Obviously, Max and Lando did not finish qualifying in those positions, so half point each means 1 point. We're on the board for qualifying and for our predictions, so 1 out of 3 there. Not shaping up to be one of my finest weekends. Speaking of not being my finest predictions, my race podium of a Max Verstappen win. We finally got that one. We can take that one to the bank pretty much at this point, so hey, we'll take that. But then I also predicted a double Ferrari podium. What am I doing? A double Ferrari podium? How dare I think they'll bounce back? I do think that there is a world where Ferrari finishes with a double podium, but this one is not it. So another 1 point there. And then rounding things out with my one crazy prediction, I thought we were going to see a Kevin Magnussen masterclass. I predicted a Kevin Magnussen back in the points. And obviously this was not the case. He ended up qualifying, getting knocked out in Q1, now racking up a 5-second penalty and finishing, I believe, in 17th. And so, yeah, no points for me on that one. So taking a look at my point total now, I get 2 points on the weekend, bringing my total up to 37.5 points. British actually takes the lead here, and now at 38 points after scoring 3.5 points, closing the gap. It's been pretty close so far this season, so no complaints from me there. Senna is not far behind on 36 points with F1 Inferno and Andrew behind. Inferno with 23 points and Andrew with 17.5 points. So they obviously those two joined midway through the season, and so their points are a little lower, although Inferno is flying up the rear and is really starting to close the gap as we close out round 10 in this one. But guys, the only question left is what is next in Formula One? F1 heads to Austria to race around the Red Bull Ring 1 week from now. Last year, we saw a race podium of Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, and Sergio Perez. Is that the podium we're going to see here? I think there's 2 major question marks on that podium we saw last year that I'm not quite sure we're going to see this year. But what do you think? Let me know down in the comment section below. And guys, that is going to wrap up my race review here for the Spanish Grand Prix here in 2024. I do think it had its moments of very good action on track. We saw a lot of side-by-side racing, and it was a joy to watch at times. But at the end of the day, Max Verstappen comes home to win. We snooze, and now we look forward to our next sprint weekend, 1 week from today in Austria, and it's gonna be a good one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like rating. It really helps me out. Subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single upload. That's gonna wrap it up for me here in this one, guys. Be on the lookout for the predictions video here in a couple of days, and I'll see you in the next one.